Representative Vincent and the mayor, if you would like to come up.
I'd like to take this opportunity to speak today on my House Bill 771, which is an act to prohibit licensing by the DEP of the Wheelabrator facility in the town of Saugus. As amended, this bill specifically deals with ash landfill at the Wheelabrator Saugus facility, and it would require Wheelabrator to commence closure of the landfill on December 31st, 2016. This date is based on their own 2014 solid waste report that they filed in February of this year. And it estimated that the landfill will reach capacity at this time. Further legislation would mandate that the DEP allow no further expansion of the landfill vertically or horizontally. I want to be clear that my legislation deals only with the ash landfill and would not inhibit operations of the incinerator portion of the Saugus facility. Wheelabrator, a billion-dollar corporation, currently operates and owns the incinerator in the unlined ash landfill in my district. Wheelabrator Saugus is contained within the Rumney Marsh, which is an area of critical environmental concern and is in close proximity to areas of residences in Gruyere, Saugus, and Winner. When the plant opened in 1975, we did not have the technology that we now possess. By today's standards, DEP would never allow this ash landfill to operate in an area of critical environmental concern within a half-mile from homes, and certainly not without a liner. Since 1989, the facility has operated under a consent order with the DEP, which stipulated at the time that landfill was supposed to close in 1996. However, DEP has allowed several modifications to the document and allowed Wheelabrator to go from a definitive closure date to a more flexible concept of closing when it reaches capacity. 20 years later, Wheelabrator seems to be using the consent order as a loophole to skirt around the definitive closure date. According to DEP documents, Wheelabrator Saugus is the only unlined ash landfill still in operation in the Commonwealth. Unlined ash fills in Brookline, Framingham, Freetown, and Pittsfield were all capped many years ago, yet Saugus remains alone. According to the new FEMA flood maps, parts of East Saugus and Revere, and the Saugus and Pines River, and including Wheelabrator's property, are considered to be in a flood zone due to the projected storms and the result of climate change, global warming, and rising tides. I'm deeply concerned that a devastating coastal storm will wash contaminants into my community and into America's first public beach. Further dumping in this area is unconscionable. Wheelabrator paints itself a pretty picture. They're referred to as a facility as a renewable energy from waste to facility. But in actuality, it's a trash incinerator, and it's dumping toxic ash into a landfill, sits within an area of critical environmental concern, surrounded by neighborhoods. You can call it whatever you want, but if you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. Further, Wheelabrator touts that it's a good neighbor who donates handsome sums of money to the town of Saugus. In reality, Wheelabrator and its predecessor company, Resco, have been named in many lawsuits over the years, including one in 2011, in which Wheelabrator was accused of violating many environmental laws. The suit resulted in a $7.5 million settlement, one of the largest settlements in the Commonwealth's history. Monies awarded to the cities and towns in these settlements are often counted by Wheelabrator as part of its goodwill. Finally, as some background, it took legislation in 1987 to mandate that the plant install acid scrubbers to keep toxic ash from going into the air, into homes, and into the Pines River and the Saugus River. It wasn't the DEP that required the plan to install scrubbers. It was us, because we, the legislators, wrote into law that they had to. And oftentimes it takes legislative action to right a wrong, as it is in this case. My constituents who live in Revere and Saugus have lived with this facility for 40 years. And to have to endure environmental and health hardships because of it. These communities are directly impacted by the Bill of Greater Saugus, and all of these communities are designated by the state as areas of environmental justice. It isn't a case of not in my backyard. We've had it in our backyard for generations, and it's time for the legislature to once again intervene and say, enough is enough. No more extension. It's our job to adopt legislation that protects our districts and our constituents. What is happening in my district today is a moral injustice. Let's right the wrong. I respectfully ask that you please consider this House bill and release it favorably as amended.
Since the early 1970s, Resco and now Wheelabrator has dumped about 300 to 500 tons of toxic ash adjacent to their plant on Route 107, and that has continued since that time. This ash landfill, as the representative alluded to, is in the middle of an area of critical environmental concern as it sits in the midst of the Rumney Marshes and the Saugus River watershed. The incinerator ash contains toxic heavy materials such as lead, mercury, calcium, as well as dioxin, a known carcinogen. The Massachusetts Cancer Registry confirms that Saugus and Revere residents have higher than expected cancer rates. This ash dump was supposed to close in 1996, but has since been granted 9 extensions from the DEP. In the middle of all this, in 2011, Resco was forced to pay a $7.5 million settlement in response to environmental violations. The settlement was at the time one of the largest of its kind in the history of Massachusetts. So we see that this is already an institution that's struggling with environmental compliance. We understand that facilities like this need to exist. When you think about an area such as ours, Revere, Saugus, Wynn, a densely populated area that has, as the representative has said, has tolerated this and lived with this for 40 years. And anecdotally, you can look at some of the impacts that I talked about here today, what it has done to the quality of life of residents, and really what it's done with respect to, I believe, our public health in those areas. I think it's time that we start to look at other less dense, less populated areas of facilities like this.
Before becoming a rep, I was a selectman in Saugus, and we always worked with the residents of Saugus. And to this day, since I've been a selectman to now, I agree with the community that we should never have a third burner at Resco. But also looking at the quality of life. I've been getting calls, both pro and cons. It's not just a Saugus issue. It's the community around it. It's all of Massachusetts. And we have to really weigh out the pros and cons. And I hope that we can get together and work this out.
My name is Elle Baker. I'm a former resident of East Saugus. I currently live in the Revere Point neighborhood. As my role, I'm neighborhood organizer for Revere Move under the Healthy Community Initiatives Department in Revere. And it's our mission to promote active living and healthy lifestyles in our community. So I believe that the community has a right to influence the type and quality of business in the neighborhood, especially if it lends to the impact of the quality of their life. Saugus and Revere still continues to endure the repercussions of the actual incinerator. The smell of the trash as they bring it to the facility before it's burned. This is something that permeates the neighborhood and affects the quality of life for the people that live in this area, because it's something we endure on a daily basis. And this is a concern that I would like to bring to you and to your attention. In the 1950s, it was already a dump. That's true. And it was always the smell of the trash. in the 1970s, it progressed to a landfill. The landfill was a solution to dispose of the residue from the incineration process. We as a society are getting more environmentally conscious, and it's time for Wheelabrator to seek the best alternatives for this ash residue, for the community and for the environment as a whole. In a recent tour of the Wheelabrator facility, I had the opportunity to meet with many of the representatives that are here today from Wheelabrator to tour the actual ash landfill and to talk a little bit about the ash and its potential impacts to the neighborhood. During the tour, we spoke a little bit about the fly ash and the bottom ash and the levels of toxicity. In the United States, we currently mix the fly ash and the bottom ash together, which reduces the toxicity of the overall bulk of ash, if you will. In other countries, they still separate it. They consider the fly ash more toxic than the bottom ash, and the fly ash is 10%. And they actually dispose of that as if it is hazardous and toxic waste. The bottom ash, over time, innovative methods have been adopted in order to utilize the substance for other things. In Japan, for example, they make glass out of the ash material. There are studies being done to utilize and reuse this ash. There are other alternatives. As a neighbor and a resident of this facility, I ask that it's time to explore these new alternatives instead of relying on another amendment to the initial consent order, which asked this facility to close the landfill 20 years ago. Please consider supporting this legislative bill for our community to stop the further expansion of this ash landfill that was initially stated to close in 1996.
You know, landfills always have a useful life and a closure plan. We've already heard that this landfill was initially designated to go up to 40 feet and been expected to close over a decade ago and be capped over with a grassy mix. As we know, that didn't happen. The current extension allows for height up to 50 feet, and the final closure plan right now is scheduled for December 2016. Now we believe it's time to focus on that closure plan, to identify an alternative to disposing of the ash. It's our opinion that Wheelabrator has launched a public relations campaign. They're hosting a series of tours with free meals. They're offering in writing significant host community payments to keep the landfill open. And they're distributing thousands of glossy, beautiful flyers. While they're focused on public relations, that really leaves us with one thing, and that's the truth. And there are a few truths that I would like to mention. First, the truth is that no, Wheelabrator doesn't have a dispute between environmental record. We've heard a few folks mention the 2011 civil complaint that was a $7.5 million fine. I want to read one quote from that complaint. Open quote. Wheelabrator operates municipal waste combustors in Saugus, North Andover, and Millbury, Massachusetts, in the course of incinerating and processing municipal trash. Each of these Wheelabrator facilities violated environmental laws, including by allowing the release of fugitive ash into the air, failing to properly treat, store, or dispose of bottom ash and fly ash, improperly disposing of contaminated wastewater, and failing to report the sudden release of hazardous materials as required by law, end quote. Another truth that you've heard a bit about is that families in Saugus and Revere, neighborhoods that are very close, have been impacted by a long time. And some of the pollutants that they've been impacted by are dioxin. On the global cancer rates, you've heard that they're elevated. And it is true, with all cancer, you usually cannot link it to any environmental source. But we do know that dioxin and many other pollutants that are generated by waste incineration contribute to cancer. This is a fact. It's on the EPA's website. I'll have the link in my written materials. Knowing that, what I would ask you, and I'm appreciative of for Vincent's legislation, is that we should not be doing anything that increases those sources of pollution. That would be a mistake. Another truth is that keeping this landfill open beyond 2016, we believe, flies in the face of a lot of other efforts that are ongoing right now. Wheelabrator is not the only one spending millions of dollars. Saugus and Revere are right now under consent orders, and they are spending millions and millions of dollars on what they're required to do, while the communities are paying the bill and doing what they're supposed to do. Finally, I believe that we should not be talking about expanding this landfill at all right now. Instead, what we should be talking about is how are we going to, in the face of climate change, sea level rise, and storm surge related to that, how are we going to protect public health and the environment. Right now, today, throughout New England, coastal managers and local public officials are working together to try and identify what are the risks. What are the risks with sea level rise? And when you have an ash landfill that's located right on the coast, that is a risk. So the focus right now should not be on, hey, how long can we keep this thing open, but how can we protect our people and our environment from what might occur with climate change. If past and current actions tell us anything about the future, it appears that Saugus has absolutely no intention of closing this landfill in 2016 or any point in the future, unless required by law. Without this legislation, we believe Wheelabrae will likely continue to offer financial incentives and otherwise find ways to avoid following the landfill closure plans that they've already agreed to, that are required by permits, and we certainly expect them to comply with.
The other day I was riding, a couple months ago, I was riding down to, it was a hot day, and I was riding my bike to PJ's in Revere, and this odor really got to me. I was gagging, my eyes were watering, I couldn't even breathe, and found out it was smell from the ash. Now, I feel bad for the lobstermen in my precinct, and I feel bad for the fishermen. The water is coming up. And the thing is, there's no wire. When you have a climate change, the water rises. The water's going to rise, and this ash is going to go into the river. If they can get trucks in there to take this ash out, put it in some trucks, close it up, take it somewhere, that'd be fine. But that will never happen. We can't have commercial fishermen, commercial lobstermen, and commercial mussel people have this contaminated. It's going to be sold to the markets, and we're going to get cancer from it. This has got to stop. We've got to get rid of this ash somehow, some way, or close down the facility altogether. If these people can't be with the residents and say to the residents, listen, we're going to do you a favor, we're going to clean this mess up. That's fine, but they're not going to do that. All they're doing is giving us bowls of water, food, bringing us over there to see the facility. Who cares about the facility? You've got to do something about cleaning the environment. My granddaughter's going to high school. I don't want her to come down with cancer. I don't want to see the next generation come down with cancer. This has got to stop. It's got to stop now. Not tomorrow, not next year, and not the year later. It's got to stop immediately. These people have to get rid of this act, or else we're all going to get sick.
The people of Saugus were the DEQE, Department of Environmental Quality Engineering, as was called then, official, his name is Thomas McLaughlin, stated to the public that the ash at this site, at the 14-year-old facility at that time, was not being dumped, but was being stored for future use and future testing. Thus, at that time, 2,200,000 tons of ash laced with lead, cadmium, mercury, and dioxins was stockpiled in the midst of an ACEC, Area of Critical Environmental Concern, surrounded by communities that had and still have elevated cancer rates, just waiting for future use and future testing, which never took place. The collective jaw of the community dropped that evening, as we all realized the very agency that was supposed to be looking out for the quality of the environment was really looking out for Wheelabrae. We quickly realized that we did not have the benefit of the best available control technology, or acid gas scrubbers, that Wheelabrae was touting as new technology at their newly constructed Millbury facility. We asked why the people of Saugus had to accept risks and burdens greater than any other community. We begged Governor Dukakis and his agencies to act. They did not. It was the Massachusetts legislature that acted on behalf of Saugus. Legislation brought scrubbers to this plant, not regulation. It was soon realized that with cleaner air, there would be dirtier, more toxic ash. You see, it's only in the fantasy of wizards and alchemists that metals like mercury or cadmium or a compound like dioxin can be destroyed through burning. So the DEQE at that time decided that something had to be done with all that ash that had been allowed to stockpile in the marsh environment. Enforcement action in the form of a consent order was issued and agreed to by Wheelabrae. The area where the ash was dumped had to be contained.
It would be impossible to lift up all of those tons of ash to install a line as would be required on any new landfill. So a slurry wall was built in the hopes of preventing the surrounding area from being affected by the 150,000 yielding tons of ash. Most important was that this was a remedial measure, and it was so ordered that the dumping of the ash in the ACEC had to cease by 1996. That was 19 years ago, and 9 administrative consent order adjustments ago. Since then, 2,750,000 more tons of ash have been dumped thanks to those 9 amendments as agreed to by the DEP. It is clear that the DEP and Wheelgrader have used the consent order process as a loophole to the very laws that you folks have enacted to protect us so that this landfill can continue. Now it's slated to shut by December of 2016, and it is, as Rep. Vincent pointed out, it is the only ash landfill in the state of operating the line. DEP feels that there is a way, we are told, that this can happen without local approval. They don't have to follow a Chapter 111. Town officials disagree and are now prepared, I am told, to challenge any such DEP decision. Article 97 of the Massachusetts Constitution states that the people have a right to clean air and water, freedom from excessive and unnecessary noise, and the benefit of the natural and historic, scenic, and aesthetic qualities of the environment. The people I represent are entitled to those protections. If the slurry wall that was designed for remediation is acceptable in Saugus to go from 50 to 75 to 150 feet as is being discussed, in the midst of an ACEC to allow for continued ash dumping, then why isn't a slurry wall acceptable for other landfills outside of a 100-year flood zone? Saugus was helped by the legislature when the executive branch agencies did not act in the face of environmental injustice. We are here today to ask that you again help Saugus by affording us the same level of environmental protection required by the Commonwealth. Please support your colleague, RoseLee, Representative Vincent's legislation, and any amendments that she may offer.
Today, with regard to how long this issue has been in existence, and I'm not going to belabor that point. I'm also not going to belabor the point as to how long I have been adversely affected by this plan. Suffice it to say, my wife is a 3-time cancer survivor. As I was listening to the testimony this afternoon, I think Representative Vincent touched on all the critical points with regards to this legislation. I'm hoping you'll support it. But I was struck as I was listening to the testimony, and I looked at this copy of the September 24th issue of the Saugus Advertiser. It states in one of the paragraphs at the September 14th board meeting, Pamela Harris, who is a resident of East Saugus, said she couldn't understand why the Board of Health had no results at all as to the recent violation for emissions of dioxins from that plant. Dioxins are known carcinogens. Where this is ironic is that in their own flyer, they state, we maintain an open line of communication with Saugus Board of Health, with whom members of our management team meet with regularly to provide updates and answer any questions they may have. So regularly is what, 2 months, 3 months, or whenever it suits them? I have no idea. I'm going to leave you with this point. In the state of South Carolina this week, the news reported that they were the victims of a 1,000-year-old storm. Well over a foot of water inundated that state. We're in a floodplain. We're in a floodplain, and we're now talking about 1,000-year-old storms. This containment for this ash fill is totally insufficient for the purposes for which it was put up. I'm struck by the issue of the slurry wall. I haven't heard the word slurry wall since we had the big dig here in Boston, and we had leaking coming through the slurry wall. Now we're talking about toxic materials. I'm asking you to support this legislation. It's critical.
I offer this testimony on behalf of the Conservation Law Foundation, where I'm the Vice President and the Director of CLF Massachusetts. We protect New England's environment for the benefit of all people. We use the law, science, and the market to create solutions that are innovative and preserve our natural resources and build healthy communities and sustain a vibrant economy. Well, first of all, thank you again for having me here, and I support House Bill 771. I I just want to say one thing. I'm not an engineer. I did work for many years at the US EPA. I'm a lawyer. As I understand it, the slurry wall goes around the landfill. And as far as DEP, again, I am a lawyer. We're suing DEP for failure to do something that they were statutorily required to do. And it's important when we put all of this burden on DEP to fix this, and certainly DEP can. They've lost 120 people. They don't have the capacity that they have had over the years. So I do think that there is a role for the legislature, and I'm pleased that Rep. Vincent introduced this legislation, and I hope to see it passed. I wanted to talk more specifically about the issue of environmental justice. I was the Director for Environmental Justice under former Secretary of Environmental Affairs, Bob Durant. And back in 2002, it'll be 13 years tomorrow that Secretary Durant signed an environmental justice policy. And it's the first policy in this state, and I authored that policy on Secretary Durant after 3 years of interviews, tours, talk with academics and community members. So I feel very fluent and know intimately environmental justice issues, and in particular in the state. And after I left state government, I was actually called to be an expert witness in a case involving the landfill expansion in Stockbridge. I did mostly environmental justice work at CLF. And very briefly, environmental justice is this principle that no group of people, race, income should bear a disproportionate environmental burden. And environmental justice policy that I wrote, and the one that's now going through revisions and is out for public comment, have a number of thresholds that identify these communities that are most vulnerable. One is an annual household income at or below 65% of the statewide median income. 25% or more of the residents are people of color. 25% or more of the households have limited English proficiency. Both Saugus and Revere and Lynn have environmental justice communities. And in having those environmental justice communities, it's important that when we place not just land uses or allow them to continue, that we're burdening these communities that might also have compromised health, might have high incidence of heart disease, stroke, asthma. So it's important to think about those and take them into consideration. Have continued to make environmental justice a priority by supporting the executive order that Governor Patrick signed in 2014. That's Executive Order 552, and in revising the environmental justice policy that I mentioned that's now out for public comment. I've visited this landfill in Revere, and I'm really concerned about the communities that it burdens. I'm also concerned, as you've heard from other people, about the impacts of climate change, and that this is in a floodplain in the salt marsh, and at least unlined on the bottom. So I would urge the committee to strongly support House 771, which will move us forward towards a safe and healthful environment as envisioned by Article 97.
You mentioned something about we currently work that you actually have a suit pending against the DEP.
We
How
always do.
often does that happen? Not necessarily just from you, but in general, how often is the DEP being sued across the town?
I can't really say. Based on my organization, we have had many lawsuits against DEP to try to compel them to do their job. As you might know, or others might know, we were really, we sued to clean up Boston Harbor, which led to the creation of MWRA. So we tend to undertake suits that are really impactful and that we're very committed and sure about. But in general speaking, we at any given time might have something against going on against DEP, whether it's in federal court or if it's a challenge of a permit, which we have a couple of those things going on as well.
My name is Debra. I currently serve as the chairperson of the Saugus Board of Selectmen. I've been working so much with this over the decades about incineration. In fact, I know more about incineration than I've ever wanted to know about incineration. And all the questions that I get to my home, at least half of them deal with the Wheeler facility. We did write to the committee with our first letter from the board, And last night, we took another vote to write another letter, which I will submit as testimony, so I'm not going to read that verbiage, and a lot of it has already been covered. So what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about some of the things that you heard today. In 2003, we were told that Wheelabrator was considering a third burner. And I worked as a town meeting member for 3 amendments, for 3 articles that go before town meeting to try to limit the ash, how far the ash can go. At that time, we were told it was 40 feet. Lo and behold, it was 50 feet. But that did pass town meeting, and then we found out afterwards, no, that doesn't count. Forget all that work that you did. So that was very discouraging. Somebody mentioned about a slurry wall. If you look and do your research, you'll find slurry walls eventually leach into the water supply, and it's right next to the Saugus River. Somebody else talked about the selectmen being more involved. I can't imagine anybody being more involved than I have been in terms of Wheelabrator. They come to our Board of Health meetings. I try to attend all of the Board of Health meetings. I listen to what has to be said among everyone. I listen to the residents, and I've gone on multiple tours of the facility over the years. Somebody else mentioned about we need to all work together. The Wheelabrator and the DEP allowed, you heard there were 9 extensions over the last 20 years, and Saugus officials weren't informed. I certainly wasn't informed. In fact, when we were putting together the information, I personally was surprised there weren't 9 extensions. Somebody talked about the birds and the butterflies and the grasshoppers and being an environmentalist. I think those are all important. I'm here today to talk about the people, the human beings that live in Precinct 3, Precinct 10, the people that live in all of Saugus, people that live in Revere, that live in Lynn, and the full community. It's very important. I have relatives in that area. They talk about the soot that is on their grass. And somebody else talked about, well, somebody said that Resco causes cancer, Wheelabrator causes cancer. I never heard that Wheelabrator causes cancer because you can't say, well, it's just that one plant that causes cancer. However, when you look at the statistics in Lynn, Saugus, and Revere, they're outstanding. And I don't mean that in a good sense. When I looked at them, I was devastated to be living in a community with statistics that high. So regardless of the reason why, I certainly don't want to do anything that's going to put our town in additional harm's way. I want a healthy community. I want a healthy Saugus and Revere and Lynn in Massachusetts. They talked about communication. We just found out that as early as July, that the plant's dioxin rates were higher than the standard. I mean, clearly, there's been issues over the years. I mean, I only have probably no time left, so I'm not going to go into all those different issues, but there are concerns. I believe the passage of this bill is very important to the community, to all the people that live in those neighboring cities and towns. It's important for people, it's important for our natural resources. It's the right thing to do. And I certainly hope that you vote in favor of this House Bill, RoseLee Vincent's legislation.
How much dialogue has happened at the level of in Saugus about this with the municipal council, town meetings? It was said earlier by some of the opponents of the bills was that there was virtually no dialogue. But your mayor supports it. I've heard a couple of your select folks speak today. How much has this this issue been discussed publicly in Saugus?
We have not had a recent public hearing, but I can tell you that years ago we've had lots and lots of dialogue with the citizens, and I think the most important thing is educating people about the issues at hand.
The town, I think, over the last 20 years, there's no extensions, right?
Correct. None.
Okay, so at what point did the town say, listen, we don't want any more extensions?
Do you mind if I?
No, that's fine.
Thank you.
I believe the first, 1998, the Board of Selectmen asked me to attend a DEP meeting, and where the extensions were being considered. And the point is here is if the company wants to meet with the Selectmen, they sent the letter, but they want to do it behind closed doors. Unfortunately, there's this little problem called the open meeting law. They don't want to meet in public. They want to do it behind closed doors. And they go to the Board of Health, and I think if you remember, the Board of Health talk about how they have 7 plans for the ash, but they won't say because the regional manager says he doesn't have permission from above. So transparency takes place on the tour, but according to the open meeting law, this board can't meet. So yes, there's been opposition, and the town has conducted legal research as to what its rights are after the next extension comes. Okay.
I guarantee that on that. We were at a Board of Health meeting a couple of months ago, and Mr. Manoogian was the plan manager, when Wheelbury representatives were there, can we have a meeting, can we set up a time? And there was talks about a date, so that all, to your question, to everybody could get together, and
They wanted to, they wanted to make they've hired a big lobbying firm to handle this one. And this is an issue that shouldn't be won or lost or decided based on political pressure. This is a justice issue. It's a consent order. Consent order should not be used to do something that otherwise is not allowed.
And regarding communication, I also went on a tour, and I also asked what alternative measures that Wheelbury might have, and they refused to answer me. As a state representative, I was actually appalled that when I asked the question, I did not get an answer. That tour was a few weeks ago. I have yet to have anyone reach out and give me any of the answers that I had requested. So as far as communication, I would think that as the state representative whose communities surround this area, they would have reached out to me. They have not.
I come here today as a resident of Saugus, in particular East Saugus, and I'm here today to come before you to ask for your support for not only the citizens of Saugus, but to ask your support for your colleague, Representative Vincent. I was born in East Saugus. I've lived there my whole life. I'm probably one of the closest residents to the facility, and I have lived in that house and my parents' house for the last 40 years and have endured years of fly ash, horrendous odors, and countless pollutants since it opened. When the facility was built, we had no technology. This was brand new technology. In fact, we basically lived with years of the Divadio dump and the odors and the fires. And with this new technology that was put in by boards of selectmen years ago, we all thought we were doing the right thing. Shortly after that, we found out that there were repercussions, such as the fly ash that covered our backyard. And on occasion, Rizzo would come through the neighborhoods with special hoses and cleaning technology to clean our homes. In the pools, everybody's pool had, just layers and layers of ash. Yes, that has changed, but the fact remains that ash is still in our environment and in our neighborhoods, not only in East Saugus, but throughout our town, and also in our neighboring towns of Min and Revere. And this whole area is part of ACPC, so it is precious marshlands filled with all sorts of animals and fish and wildlife, and it's important to us. So moving along from that, I'd like to say that, regarding the pollutants and such, as recent as July, when staff testing was done, and this is done every 9 months at the facility, there was an abnormal finding of dioxin. And for those of you that are not familiar with dioxin, it is a proven carcinogen, and not your everyday chemical that comes out of a facility. So besides dioxin, and that being abnormal, there's also levels of mercury, cadmium, and all sorts of pretty scary things that we have found out over the years that we are exposed to. And when this abnormal test of dioxin occurred, obviously Resco did notify the town and notify DEP, and DEP did give them a retest. We don't quite know why. We're still trying to look at that, but they did give them a retest, and the retest, on that retest, the dioxin level was back to normal, and we were given a reason or a supposed reason why. But the issue is this. The dioxins, as I was told recently by the Resco facility people, not to worry because they're only nanograms. You would never even be able to see these levels. Well, let me tell you, sir, I have 40 years of being exposed to nanograms, as do my fellow citizens. And we are concerned. We are concerned because it's a proven fact that the CDC has put out their cancer levels, and they're awful. The cancer levels within Saugus, Revere, and Lynn are significantly higher than the rest of the state. And that's concerning to me. And I think if any of you lived in Saugus, it would concern you as well. I've buried enough of my family members. I've buried enough of the residents and friends that we have within our neighborhood and within the town to be concerned. I see the lights. I see the facility 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Okay, morning, noon, and night. I hear the trucks backing up, and I've endured that for a lifetime. So I say there is concern. This is one of the oldest plants in the New England area, and probably one of the oldest throughout the U.S. So it's antiquated. And what it is a patch job. It's continuously putting Band-Aids on this, okay, to come up within compliance, to bring it to the so-called, safe facility. And I really question that. I question that as an East Saugus resident. In 2011, nobody was more surprised than to learn there had been an intervention, and there had been, the facility had been in the middle of the night, DEP, EPA, everybody was there. All the different state and federal departments were there and raided the facility. And the outcome of that was a $7.5 million fine, the highest fine that was given to a facility like this within the U.S., I believe. And so how do you think that would make any resident feel? I mean, if I lived in Boston, I'd be concerned, okay? Not a good feeling. And for such a wonderful facility and all the people that have come up here and spoken today, I ask you, aren't you concerned with the $7.5 million fine by the Attorney General? This is about public health. The public health of Saugus, the public health of Revere, the public health of Lynn, in all the cities and towns that surround it. Because if we don't have it, somebody else will in Massachusetts. And it's not about not in my backyard, because there has to be, because of technology, there has to be a place to put this. But I say to you, please don't allow them to continue to have a lifespan at that landfill. And we deserve better. You deserve better. I deserve better. So I ask you to please think about this. And if you come down to take a tour of the plant, which I think that it would certainly be beneficial to you, I would say you're certainly welcome to come one street over and visit my home. Look out my backyard, where you can see that plant and what I'm talking about. It isn't just a story. It's evidence of where I live, how we live day in and day